Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Audible, you're audible. Please continue.
Yeah, thank you. So it's a real pleasure and a proud privilege to be introducing the resource person for the present session. So we have amidst us Joseph Dorai Raj, Professor of English at the School of English and Foreign Languages at Gandhigram Rural Institute, Gandhigram, Tamil Nadu. During 2013-14, he was the acting vice chancellor of the same. A Fulbright scholar, he's been visiting universities all over the world, particularly, to name a few, at New York and Belgium. A true scholar, he has published 52 articles and authored 5 books. I would be naming a few books: Myth and Literature, Interventions, Essays in Philosophy and Literary Theory, Philosophical Hermeneutics, FAQs on Research Literature and Language. He's also edited 2 books, Critical Essays on Indian English Poets and Essays on Gandhi. He has successfully guided over 16 PhD candidates and has adjudicated more than 100 PhD theses. Sir was also visiting professor of philosophy at Satya Nilayam, which has been affiliated to Madras University from 2009 to 12. He was also visiting professor of English at Osmania University in 2016. He is the founder editor of Gandhigram Literary Review. He is also an assessor for NAC since 2012 and was involved in the preparation of NAC's revised methodology. To end the intro, I would like to mention his visit to Hislop College. He was here in 2018, the year 2018, to guide us on autonomy and help us with preparation of NAC. Sir, I welcome you again on behalf of RTMNU and all the participants of the refresher course. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pooja, for the warm words of welcome. Yes, I remember my visit to Hislop College, and that's a memorable visit. I remember your principal, Dr. Christiana, and also the vice principal, Dr. Prantik Banerjee, and I remember having met you as well. So,
Yes, sir.
So thanks for the warm words of introduction.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you so much.
So, dear friends, good afternoon. I am happy to meet you through Zoom this afternoon. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Kapil Singhel, the coordinator of this refresher course in English, for having invited me to deliver 2 lectures, one this afternoon and the other lecture to be delivered tomorrow afternoon. Thank you, sir. Thank you for this warm invitation. I also thank my friend Dr. Prantik Banerjee of Hislop College, Nagpur, because it was Dr. Prantik Banerjee who suggested my name to Dr. Kapil Singhel, and I am grateful to Dr. Prantik as well. So, dear friends, I'll be delivering 2 lectures, one this afternoon, right now, and the other lecture I will deliver it tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. Today, I'll be talking about the canon, and tomorrow I'll be talking about Derrida and deconstruction. Okay, so that is the plan. So Dr. Kapil tells me that the session is for 1.5 hours. So which means by 2:30 I shall wind up. By 2:15 or 2:20 I shall stop my lecture, and maybe we can have some Q&As for 10 to 15 minutes. In any case, I shall wind up sharply at 2:30. Thank you. So good afternoon, dear friends. The topic that I have chosen for this afternoon presentation is critiquing the canon. And I have divided my presentation into 4 parts. So in the first part of my lecture, I will try to answer 2 questions. And what are the 2 questions that I will be answering in the first part of my presentation? What is canon and what constitutes the canon? I shall also shed some light on canon formation. So this will be the first part of my presentation. In the second part of my presentation, I'll try to answer this question, a very important question. What is wrong with the literary canon as it exists today? Hamlet remarked, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. So if I can borrow that quote and modify it a bit, I would say something is rotten as far as the literary canon today. So the second part of the presentation, I will try to answer the question, what is wrong with the literary canon as it exists today? Now the third part will be a continuation of the second part of the presentation. Once we identify what is wrong with the literary canon, how do we critique the canon? How do we deconstruct the canon? So I will try to answer this question in the third part of my presentation. And in the fourth part of the presentation, that is towards the end, I'll be highlighting the responsibilities of teachers when it comes to expanding the canon. So dear friends, this is the scheme of my presentation, and this is how I have organized my lecture, my presentation. It is in 4 parts. In the first part, I will be talking about canon formation. In the second part, I will point out what is wrong with the literary canon. And in the third part, I will be suggesting some ways and strategies as to how to critique and deconstruct the canon. And towards the end, I'll be talking about the teacher's responsibilities when it comes to expanding the canon. So dear friends, some of you may be wondering, why did I choose this topic? Is there any particular reason as to why I chose this topic? I need to justify the choice of the topic. So therefore, to begin my presentation, I'll draw your attention to 4 newspaper clippings. And all the 4 newspaper clippings have been extracted from the Times of India, but of course, different dates and different years. Now, may I draw your attention to a news story that appeared in the Times of India 1 year back. So that was 2021. The exact date is 26th of August 2021. So this was a news story that appeared in the Times of India 1 year back. And the title was, Delhi University drops stories of Dalit writers from English syllabus. I repeat, Delhi University drops stories of Dalit writers from English syllabus. It is a fairly long story. I am not going to read out the entire news story, but please allow me to read out 2 short paragraphs. So the first paragraph reads like this. Draupadi, a story by Mahashweta Devi, and the writings of Bama, Faustina Susairaj, and Sugirta Rani, both Dalit feminist writers, were removed from the English syllabus in Delhi University. Despite the resistance of 15 elected members, the Academic Council, which met on Tuesday, approved the job. So dear friends, this is the first paragraph. I will read out 1 more paragraph, the second paragraph, a short paragraph. It reads like this. In a core paper titled Women's Writing in Semester 5, the Oversight Committee has committed the maximum vandalism. It first decided to remove 2 Dalit authors, namely Bama and Sugirta Rani. Second, the committee, as an afterthought, suddenly asked for the deletion of the celebrated short story of Mahashweta Devi Draupadi. So dear friends, this is a news clipping from the Times of India dated 26th of August 2021. I mentioned that I would draw your attention to 4 newspaper clippings. So this is the first of the 4 newspaper stories. Let us go to the second one, and this is from Maharashtra, and it is dated 27th of October 2010, so almost 12 years back. So this again is from the Times of India 2010, and just one sentence, I will read out only one sentence. Rohinton Mysteries novel, Such a Long Journey, has been pulled from a course syllabus and burned by students at a Mumbai university. So this happened, this was reported on the 27th of October 2010. For the third story, we will go back to Delhi University. So this again is a newspaper story taken from the Times of India. It is dated 10th October 2011. Just two sentences. Delhi University to scrap Ramanujan essay on Ramayana that incensed one wing of the student community. The 30-page essay, which offers a number of tellings of the epic story of Lord Rama, including the Jain, Buddhist, and Kannada narratives, had not gone down well with one section of the student community, some of whom called it blasphemous. So this story was reported in the Times of India on the 10th of October 2011. Now here is the last story. So this happened in Tamil Nadu. So two from Delhi University, one from Bombay University, and the last story is from one of the universities in Tamil Nadu, and it is MS University, Manonmaniam Sundaranar University, which is located in Tirunelveli, close to Kanyakumari, 100 kilometers from Kanyakumari. And this was reported on the 12th of November 2020. Just one sentence. Tamil Nadu's MS University withdraws Arundhati Roy's book, Walking with the Comrades, from the syllabus. So dear friends, two from Delhi University, one from Bombay University, and the last story was from one of the universities in Tamil Nadu, MS University located in Tirunelveli. Now all the four stories have something in common. They raise an important question. What should be in and what should be out? What should be included in the literary canon and what should be excluded or what should be thrown out of the literary canon? And when something is thrown out of the literary canon, is it done for academic reasons or for religious reason or for political reason or for ideological reasons? All these we will discuss during the course of this lecture. So in other words, we need to talk about what is the canon, what constitutes the canon, and who are the people who canonize authors and who canonize texts. So these are some of the important questions that we will be addressing in the course of this lecture. To begin with, I'll talk about the origin of the term canon. I'll be talking about the etymology of the term canon. And very precisely, I'll be talking about the origin of the canon with reference to the Bible and also with reference to literary text. Now, dear friends, if you look at the etymology of the term canon, we realize that it has Greek roots. So the English word canon, C-A-N-O-N, has come from the Greek canon, K-A-N-O-N. So in Greek, if you look at the etymology of the term canon, we realize that it is from Greek. And in Greek, it means a measuring rod or standard. I repeat, in Greek, the word canon, spelled K-A-N-O-N, means or signifies a measuring rod or standard connoting straightness. In other words, and this is taken from the Jerome Biblical Commentary, there is an entire chapter on canon, and the title of the chapter is Canonicity. It talks about the origin of the term canon. It also talks about the literal meaning and the metaphorical meaning associated with the term canon. So here is a short quote from the Jerome Biblical Commentary. It goes like this. The original meaning of the term canon was reed, R-E-E-D. The word gradually came to signify any straight rod or bar, a measuring stick or rod used by masons and carpenters. So initially, the measuring rod or the measuring stick was used by masons and carpenters. Eventually, the term assumed a metaphorical connotation and began to mean a norm or standard, something to serve to determine, rule, or measure other entities. So, dear friends, we realize two things. So, the first thing that we realize is the
Excuse
word
me, sir.
canon. Yes?
I'm so sorry I'm disturbing. We are just wondering whether you have a PPT.
No, I don't have a PPT.
Okay, okay. Because if, like all the participants are chatting on the box. So,
Okay, okay. So
yeah,
there is
thank
no
you, sir.
PPT. Okay,
Yeah,
thank
thank
you.
you, sir. I'm so
Thank you.
sorry.
Fine.
Yeah.
If there's anything else, you please call me.
Yes, sir. Sure, sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. In case I am not visible or in case I
No, no,
lose
you're
my
fairly audible.
connection. Okay,
Nothing,
fine.
nothing.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fine. So, dear friends, I was talking about the origin of the term. I was talking about the etymology of the term canon. So, canon is from Greek, and originally it meant a measuring rod or standard. And originally it was used by masons and carpenters, but eventually it assumed a metaphorical connotation or significance. Now, dear friends, I made it very clear that when we talk about the canon, we necessarily have to go to the Bible. Now, as teachers of English language and literature, all of us have some idea of the Bible because we talk about Milton's Paradise Lost and we also talk about Milton's Paradise Regained. Okay, fine. Now, let us talk about the Bible very briefly because that is the origin of the word canon. So, whenever we talk about the canon, we necessarily have to bring in the Bible. Fine. Now, as we all know, the Holy Bible is divided into two parts or two sections. We have the Old Testament and we also have the New Testament. Books written before the birth of Jesus Christ, they are collected under the banner Old Testament. And books that were composed, that were written after the birth of Jesus Christ, they come under what is known as the New Testament. So the Bible is divided into two parts. We have the Old Testament and we have the New Testament. Fine. Now, here are two important questions. So the first question is, when we talk about the New Testament, books written after the birth of Jesus Christ, so how many books are there in the New Testament? So it's a very simple question. I repeat the question. We are talking about the Bible. We are talking about the second part of the Bible, namely the New Testament. So the question is, how many books are there in the New Testament? Now the answer is 27. Okay, we start with the four Gospels, and the four Gospels talk about the birth of Jesus Christ, the life of Jesus Christ, and his teachings or preachings. So these are the first four books of the Bible, followed by Acts of the Apostles. And we have a string of letters or epistles. And the final book of the Bible is the book of Apocalypse or the book of Revelation. Fine. So therefore, the question is, the New Testament, how many books are there in the New Testament? The answer is plain and simple, 27. Now let us raise the second question. It is a controversial question. So the question is, when we talk about the Old Testament, how many books are there in the Old Testament? So when we talked about the New Testament, we had only one answer, 27. But then when we raise this question, how many books are there in the Old Testament of the Bible? We realize that we have two different answers. If we ask our Protestant friends, Protestant Christian friends, they will give you one version. And if you talk to your Catholic friends, priests and nuns, they will give you a different version. So the question is, how many books are there in the Old Testament? The Protestant friends will tell you there are 39 books, whereas your Catholic friends will tell you there are 46 books, which means, dear friends, there is a gap of 7 books. What are these 7 books and what is their status? I will answer these two questions very briefly. So the 7 books are the book of Tobit, the book of Judith, the book of Baruch, then we have Sirach. In some versions, it is also called Ecclesiastes. Then you have 1 Maccabees and 2 Maccabees and Wisdom. So these are the 7 books. Now, according to the Protestant version, these 7 books, I will use a theological term, I will use a theological expression. These 7 books are considered apocryphal, or I will use another word, and this is the origin of the term canon. So, according to the Protestants, these 7 books, Tobit, Judith, Baruch, Sirach, 1 Maccabees, 2 Maccabees, and Wisdom, they are non-canonical. Whereas for the Catholics, for the Roman Catholics, these 7 books are part of the canon, but not primary canon, but secondary canon. So therefore, they would refer to these 7 books as deuterocanonical. So dear friends, some of you may be wondering, why did I bring in the Bible? Now, I brought in the Bible for a very simple reason. This is the origin of the term canon. So these 7 books considered controversial by one school of thought, they consider this as non-canonical, whereas the Catholics, the Roman Catholics, the fathers, the priests, the sisters, they would consider it as part of the canon, but they would call it deuterocanonical. So in other words, we need to answer 2 questions. What do we mean by the canon in the biblical sense? Question number 1. And question number 2, what do we mean by canon in the literary sense? So therefore, we need to talk about the meaning, the connotation and significance of the term canon from a biblical point of view or from a scriptural point of view, because that is the origin of the term canon. And in the same vein, we need to talk about the word canon, the term canon, with reference to literature. So canon from a biblical point of view and canon from a literary point of view. So therefore, from a biblical point of view, from a scriptural point of view, the word canon means, or the canon is, a list of authoritative books. I repeat, from the biblical perspective, from the perspective of the Bible, the canon is a list of authoritative books. Now, when we say authoritative, it has 2 meanings. Authoritative in the sense it has been decided by Rome, by Vatican. So in that sense, it is authoritative. They decide what should be inside the canon and what should be outside the canon, what is in, what is out. These are not decided by anybody and everybody. So this is to be decided by the authority of Rome. So in that sense, it is authoritative. Now, it is also authoritative in a different sense, because these are holy books or sacred books or books that have been written with divine inspiration. They are considered authoritative. So, dear friends, I have explained the origin and the etymology of the term canon, and I have also talked about the original and the earliest use of the word canon, and that was from the biblical point of view or the scriptural point of view. Now, from the Bible, let us move over to literature and let us raise an important question. The question is, from the literary point of view, from the literary perspective, what do we mean by the canon? Okay, so the answer is, from a literary point of view, from a literary perspective, the word canon has 2 meanings. What are these 2 meanings? I will spell them out shortly. I will talk about it shortly. Fine. Now, let us assume, hypothetically, let us assume that tomorrow the Oxford University Press or the Cambridge University comes up with a dramatic announcement that a new sonnet of Shakespeare has been unearthed. All of us know Shakespeare is a playwright and he is also a poet. He has some long poems and he has written more than 100 sonnets. Fine. Now imagine Oxford University Press or Cambridge University Press comes up with a dramatic declaration that a new sonnet of Shakespeare has been discovered. Okay, immediately there will be a lot of questions. Okay, and there will be criticism as well. So one group will celebrate, oh, we are very happy that one more sonnet of Shakespeare has been discovered, has been unearthed. So this is a precious addition to Shakespeare, not only to Shakespeare, but to the domain of British literature. But I'm sure there'll be another school, skeptical. They will try to raise some questions. Okay, you claim that you have unearthed a new sonnet of Shakespeare, but how are we to believe you? How sure are you that this was actually penned by Shakespeare? So in other words, we are talking about the 2 meanings of the term canon from the literary point of view. So the first meaning is, we talk of the Chaucer canon, we talk of the Shakespeare canon, we talk of the Marlowe canon, we talk of the Homer canon, we talk of the Dante canon. And this could be applied to Tamil literature, Marathi literature, Hindi literature. In other words, particularly in the case of dead authors. Okay, so if a new sonnet has been discovered, if a new sonnet of Shakespeare has been unearthed, the most important question we have to raise, actually belong to the Shakespeare canon. Is the claim genuine or is the claim spurious? So this is the first meaning of the word canon. And please allow me to read out a short quotation. And this is by Kermode. And the title of the article is Institutional Control of Interpretation. So he talks about the meaning of the canon from a literary point of view, but in the first sense of the term canon. So he says, Hamlet belongs to the canon. The Yorkshire Tragedy, a play in only 10 scenes, originally assigned to Shakespeare, but later assigned to Thomas Middleton, he says, does not belong to the canon. It belongs to the Apocrypha. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, this is the first meaning of the term canon from a literary point of view. So it is an authoritative and definitive list of works of an author, usually dead authors. Now, why do I say dead authors? Because dead authors, particularly Christopher Marlowe or William Shakespeare, they have not preserved the manuscripts. And because they have not preserved the manuscripts, we are at a loss to ascertain the genuineness or the authenticity or the veracity of any new sonnets or plays unearthed or discovered and attributed to Shakespeare or Marlowe or Spenser. So this is the original meaning and the first meaning. Now let us go to the second meaning of the term canon. And to talk about it, I will take the help of Matthew Arnold. I will refer to his 1869 publication bearing the title Culture and Anarchy. Of course, Matthew Arnold was not talking about the canon. He was talking about something else, but then we can borrow the quote and we can use it for our discussion of the canon. Now, Matthew Arnold talked about great literature, sublime literature. So how do you define great literature? How do you define sublime literature? Or what is a great book? Or what are great books in the plural? So Matthew Arnold will tell us the best which has been thought and said in the world. So what is a great book? What is a beautiful book? What is a sublime book? What is a canonical book or a canonical text? The best which has been thought and said in the world. So this is Matthew Arnold. All of us are familiar with this quote taken from Culture and Anarchy, published in 1869. In other words, from a literary point of view, a canonical text, when I say a canonical text, it could be a canonical novel, it could be a canonical poem, it could be a canonical short story, it could be a canonical, even a film, to go outside the boundaries of literature. So anything that assumes greatness. So a great book is a canonical work. A great poem is a canonical poem. A great short story is a canonical short story. Fine. So, dear friends, here is the short definition of canon, and I've taken it from Norton. Now, there is a reason as to why I extracted this quote from Norton, because if you go to academic institutions in the United States of America, colleges and universities, the standard textbook, or if I can use another term in line with today's discussion, a canonical classroom textbook is the Norton Anthology, the Norton Anthology of British Literature, the Norton Anthology of American Literature, the Norton Anthology of African American Literature, and also the Norton Anthology of Theory and Criticism. So therefore, I have taken this definition of canon from Norton, which is supposed to be a canonical textbook in American academic institutions. So the Norton would define canon as, here is the quote, the range of works that a consensus of scholars, teachers, and readers of a particular time and culture consider, look at the two adjectives, great or major. So a canonical novel is a great novel. A canonical poem is a major poem. A canonical play is a great play. So in other words, dear friends, a canon consists of major writers. A canon consists of great writers. Or to put it a little differently, a canon consists of great works, great texts, great poems, great novels. Fine. Now, as far as the Western canon is concerned, who are these great authors? Who are the great poets? Who are the great novelists? Who are the great playwrights? Fine. Now, to answer this question, we shall turn to an American professor of English, Harold Bloom. All of us are familiar with Harold Bloom, and tomorrow also I'll be talking about Bloom because Harold Bloom is one of the four Yale critics. He was a professor of English at Yale University, and Jacques Derrida was a visiting professor at Yale for some time. And he had four American disciples, and they were known as Yale critics or Yale deconstructors, and Harold Bloom was one of them. Now, in 1994, his monumental book titled The Western Canon was published. Now, I used an adjective, monumental. Now, why did I use this adjective to talk about this book? It is for two reasons. Number one, the sheer length of the book, it is monumental. It runs to 575 pages. I repeat, it runs to 575 pages. In that sense, we can consider it a monumental work. And it is also monumental because of the breadth of the content, the vision that it embodies. In that sense, also, it talks about it is monumental. Fine. Now, in this book, Harold Bloom talks about 26 great authors. Who are these great authors? What are their nationalities? I'll answer you maybe in 2 or 3 minutes. But before that, please allow me to read out the opening sentence of the book. And this is how the book reads. This is the opening sentence or the beginning of the book. Bloom writes, the book that I'm referring to is by Harold Bloom. The title of the book is The Western Canon. The Western Canon, published in 1994. So this is the opening sentence, and it reads like this. This book studies 26 writers, necessarily with a certain nostalgia, since I seek to isolate the qualities that made these authors canonical, that is, authoritative in our culture. So he uses two words. These are canonical writers. These 26 authors I am discussing in this particular book bearing the title Western Canon, they are all canonical writers. And what does Bloom mean by the term canonical? Authoritative. And who are these 26 authors? Okay, I'll give you a list, not the entire list. I'll give you the important names. Okay, so we have Shakespeare, obviously, and of course the author of the Divine Comedy, Dante. Then we have Chaucer, the father of English poetry. Then let us move over to France and the French playwright Molière. Then we come back to England, we have Milton. Then we have Samuel Johnson. Then we have the father of American poetry, Walt Whitman. Then we have the romantic poet Wordsworth, the Russian novelist and short story writer Tolstoy, the Norwegian playwright Ibsen. Then two Latin Americans, Borges and Neruda, Pablo Neruda. Then we have the Irish playwright Samuel Beckett, who wrote in French, not in English. Then Goethe, Dante, Kafka. Then we have four women authors. And who are the women authors? Jane Austen, George Eliot, Virginia Woolf, and Emily Dickinson. So, dear friends, in this book, The Western Canon, Harold Bloom talks about 26 authors. 26. Some of them are novelists, some of them are poets, some of them are playwrights. So it is a mixed bag. So he says these 26 authors, they are canonical, they are authoritative. Now, when you scrutinize this list, you realize that out of these 26 authors, there are only 4 women authors. And who are the women authors? We have Jane Austen, George Eliot, Virginia Woolf, and Emily Dickinson. So these are the only 4 authors in the list. So the remaining 22 authors, they are all men. Now, some of you may complain, why is it Bloom has not included any Asian, any Indian, any African, any Australian? Bloom will tell you. Please look at the title. The title is Western Canon. And because it talks about Western authors, white authors, European authors, I have not included any Asian or any Australian or any African. But then he could have included an African American because an African American writer also comes under the Western canon. Fine. Now, dear friends, this book talks about 26 great authors, talks about 26 canonical authors. Fine. Now, if you were to meet Harold Bloom, or if I were to meet Harold Bloom, I would ask him an important question. Mr. Bloom or Professor Bloom, you have selected 26 authors and you have canonized them. Fine. I don't have any arguments with you. I don't have any quarrel with you. But please tell me, or please tell us, on what basis did you select these 26 authors? So what were the parameters that you used? What were the yardsticks? What were the evaluation criteria that you used in order to arrive at this list? A list of 26 great or canonical or authoritative authors. Now, Bloom has anticipated this question from readers and critics alike, and then he said, I have prepared this list on the basis of 4 yardsticks. So my evaluation criteria are these. So what are the 4 evaluation criteria on the basis of which he selected these 26 authors? He says the first criterion is immortality or timelessness. Shakespeare is immortal. Shakespeare is timeless. Dante is timeless. Homer, of course, is immortal. So the first criterion or the first parameter is immortality or timelessness. The second criterion, according to Bloom, is universality. A writer may belong to a particular linguistic or cultural or religious tradition, but he or she transcends the frontiers or the boundaries of his own or her own language, culture, tradition, religion, and becomes a universal author, a universal writer. So the first characteristic is immortality or timelessness. The second parameter is universality. The third parameter is originality. Shakespeare was an original writer. Dante was an original writer. Beckett was an original writer. Jane Austen was an original writer. So the first is immortality. The second is universality. The third is originality. And the last criterion is aesthetic beauty. So 2 things. We arrive at 2 conclusions. On the basis of immortality, universality, originality, and aesthetic beauty, Harold Bloom, in his book, The Western Canon, has zeroed in on 26 authors and he has canonized them. He calls them canonical writers or authoritative writers. Fine. So, dear friends, this is the first part of my presentation. So in the first part of the presentation, I have talked about the origin, the etymology of the term canon, and the original and the first use of the word canon. This was with reference to the Bible. And I also talked about what does the canon mean in the literary context. And I referred to Harold Bloom's monumental book bearing the title, The Western Canon. Now let me move on to the second part of my presentation. So in the second part of the presentation, I will try to answer the question, what is wrong with the canon? I began my presentation with 4 newspaper stories. The first story talked about how Bama was thrown out, how Sugita Rani was thrown out, how Maheshweta Devi was thrown out of the syllabus from Delhi University, and later we talked about how Rohinton Mystery's novel was thrown out. In other words, earlier, that is one particular board of studies in English and later the academic council of that particular university, they considered these writers canonical writers, but later another set of professors, whether they are from the academic council or from the board of studies, in their perspective, these writers were non-canonical. They were not worthy of inclusion in the canon. Okay. So, dear friends, in the second part of my presentation, I would like to answer the question, what is wrong with the canon? Now, Harold Bloom has talked about 26 great authors, 26 canonical authors. Now, the important question is, the crucial question is, who decides that so-and-so is a great author, or who decides in the same way so and so is not a great author, is not worthy of inclusion in the canon. So who decides? And is it decided on purely academic merit, or is it decided on the basis of a particular individual's ideological or political or religious affiliation? So the scenario is quite complex. So therefore, the point that I want to emphasize is this: there is a lot of politics. So what are we talking about? Who decides who should be in and who should be out? So who decides the canon? Who formulates the canon? Who prepares the canon? Or who canonizes? And on what basis? So we realize there is a lot of politics. So in other words, this is my argument. There is a strong nexus or an unholy alliance between, I will spell out 4 dimensions. So the first dimension is there is an unholy alliance. There is politics between race and canon. That's the first dimension. Between gender and canon, that is the second dimension. One's economic status and canon, that is the third dimension. And finally, surprisingly, one's sexual orientation and canon. So in other words, the canon smacks of hierarchy, discrimination, exclusion, and politics. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, we need to raise some important questions when we talk of the canon, whether it is a Marathi canon or a Hindi canon or an English canon or a Tamil canon. Whose stories are narrated and whose stories are erased? Whose stories are highlighted and whose stories are marginalized? Whose voices are heard and valued and whose voices are silenced and devalued? So in other words, with reference to the 4 newspaper stories with which I began my presentation, who decides and on what basis that Bama should be in or Bama should be out? Who decides, once again, on what basis? Should Sugita Rani be inside or outside the canon? Who decides on what basis that Maheshweta Devi and her celebrated short story running to close to 20 pages, 18 pages if I remember, Draupadi, should be in or should be out? So dear friends, it is in this context that we realize, as teachers of English, we realize that the canon is, I will be using 4 terms. All of us are familiar with these 4 terms. Just for the sake of emphasis, just for the sake of reiteration, please allow me to use these 4 terms. So when we talk of the canon, we realize, number 1, the canon is androcentric. Number 2, the canon is Eurocentric. Number 3, the canon is bourgeois. And number 4, the canon is homophobic. So the first one, androcentric. Whether it is Hindi or Marathi or English or French or German, all great writers, all great poets, all great playwrights, all great novelists, they are all men. They happen to be men. And all of us know it is not an accident. So if we compile a list of great novelists, 100 great novelists of the world, 100 great poets of the world, 100 great short story writers of the world, in English, in French, in German, in Hindi, in Marathi, and if you look at the list, if you scrutinize the list, it will be shocking, it will be revealing. What will it reveal? It will reveal the strong gender bias. I'm sure more than 80 or 85 or even 90% of the great writers will be men, and it is not an accident. So the canon is androcentric. Now, if we prepare a list of 100 great poets of the world, what will the list reveal? What will the list manifest? It will reveal that the major writers, the major poets, the major short story writers, the major novelists, the major playwrights, even the major directors and filmmakers, they are all white. Either French or German or American or British or Italian, Eurocentric. So the canon is not only androcentric, the canon is Eurocentric. In other words, all great writers, they are white and they are men. So they are white, they are men, Eurocentric and androcentric. Fine. Now, not only is the canon Eurocentric and androcentric, it is also bourgeois. Okay, so what do I mean by this? In other words, you need to belong to a particular economic and socio-cultural stratum in order to be part of the canon. Okay, of course, now things are changing, particularly in Maharashtra, because it is Maharashtra that gave birth to Dalit literature, and we have some uh, very famous writers. Very recently, I was on a NAC visit to Maharashtra, and we were passing through Satara, and I was told that this is the birthplace of that famous Dalit writer, Baby Kamble. And my friend told me that even the translator, Maya Pandit, she was also from the same place. Fine. So, of late, I think the scenario is changing. But otherwise, you need to belong to a particular economic stratum. And you also need to belong to a particular caste in order to be part of the canon. So if you belong to the right caste, you are inside. If you belong to the wrong caste, you are outside the canon. It is in this sense that the canon is branded or dubbed bourgeois. So the canon is androcentric, the canon is Eurocentric, the canon is bourgeois as well, for which I would like to give a concrete example. Now, in Malayalam, we have a famous novel. The title of the novel is Kochereti, and this novel is significant because it was the first novel by a tribal writer, and the author is Narayan, and he passed away last month. So he worked with the postal department in Kerala. So the first novel by a tribal writer, the title of the novel is Kochereti. So the main character, the lead character of the novel is a woman, and her name is Kochereti. Now, please look at the publication details, the publication facts. Narayan completed writing the novel in 1988, but it took 10 long years for the novel to get published. So the actual writing, the actual composition was done in 1988, but the novel was published only in 1998. And meanwhile, one of the publishers even lost the manuscript. Now, here is a hypothetical question. Narayan was a tribal writer. He passed away last month. Now, had he been an upper caste writer or a rich writer, a bourgeois class, do you think the publication would have been delayed by 10 long years? I don't think so. I think it would have been published in 2 or 3 years of his completing the novel. So the canon, dear friends, is not only androcentric, Eurocentric, it is also bourgeois. Now let us go to the last dimension. It is also homophobic. And what do I mean by homophobic? The writer's sexual orientation will also play a part in deciding whether he or she should be part of the canon, whether he or she should be in or out. In other words, if you are a straight writer, straight means if you practice heterosexuality, the chances of your getting acceptance and admission into the canon, they are fairly strong. On the contrary, if the writer, if the poet, if the novelist, if the playwright happens to be a gay or a lesbian, then the chances of his or her getting acceptance and admission into the folds of the canon, they are not very bright. I'll give you 3 examples. Now, the first example is you take the book, The Well of Loneliness. It was published in 1928 by Jonathan Cape, and it was authored by a Britisher, a woman. Her name is Radcliffe Hall. Now, this novel talks about inversion. I repeat, this novel talks about inversion, and inversion at that time meant lesbianism. And what does the author say about lesbianism? She says a very daring pronouncement. She says it is a natural God-given state. In other words, she says there is nothing abnormal There is nothing abnormal about inversion or lesbianism. Now, soon after the novel was published, it became the target of a campaign by James Douglas, who was at that time editor of the Sunday Express. So she has to face a lot of persecution, not because it was a bad novel. Please understand. I want to underline this. The novel itself was not a bad novel, but the theme it dealt with was not acceptable. Okay, why? Because the author dealt with lesbianism. So it is in this sense that the canon is homophobic. Your sexual orientation, if you're straight, if you're heterosexual, because that is heteronormative, the chances of your getting accepted into the folds of the canon are bright. Whereas if you're a gay, if you're a lesbian, the chances are slim. Of course, Mahesh Dattani, we know his sexual orientation, but he's part of the mainstream. And that is why I said times are changing. I said I will give you 3 examples to talk about the homophobic dimension of the canon. So the first example is Radcliffe Hall and her novel The Well of Loneliness, which dealt with inversion. Inversion at that time meant lesbianism. I also want to talk about 2 other women authors who were lesbians. Adrienne Rich, all of us know she is an white American poet. Okay, she has written outstanding poems, but she confesses that because of her lesbian nature, her lesbian character, she getting acceptance and admission into the portals of the canon were not very encouraging. The third writer, the third example that I would like to give you is Audre Lorde. She is also an American poet, a woman writer, but she is an African American, and she calls herself, she describes herself as Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet. And she writes in Sister Outsider, Black, a fear of lesbians or of being accused of being a lesbian has led many Black women into testifying against themselves. So, dear friends, I have come to the end of the second part of the presentation. So, in the second part of the presentation, with a lot of evidence, I have come to the conclusion that the canon is androcentric. It is all male writers predominantly. The canon is Eurocentric. It is all white writers preponderantly. Then it is bourgeois. You need to belong to the right economic category and the right economic, not only economic, but social and cultural to get inside the canon. Otherwise, you're excluded. And the canon is also homophobic. In other words, if we look at the canon, the Western canon in particular, whom do we come across? We come across dead, white, straight guys. Okay, I repeat, and this is a quote. There are only 3 words, but I have inserted a 4th word. So the canon is dominated by dead white guys. So this was the original phrase, dead white guys. But I have included the word straight as well. So therefore it reads, the modified version reads as follows. So if you look at the Western canon, if you look at the British canon or the American canon or the French or the German canon, and it will apply in equal measure to the Hindi canon or the Marathi canon, it is dominated by dead white straight guys. Okay, so in other words, whom do we come across, whom do we encounter in the Western canon? White, male, Anglo-European, heterosexuals. Fine. So dear friends, that was the second part of my presentation where I emphasized with a lot of evidence that things are not okay with the canon. So what was the conclusion? What did we arrive at? We arrived at the fact that things are not okay with the canon. So therefore, the third part of the presentation. So the logical sequential order would be, because something is not wrong with the canon, so what should we do? We should critique the canon. We should deconstruct the canon. We should rewrite the canon. We should reformulate the canon. So there is absolutely no doubt about it. But the question is, the important question is, but how do we do it? Yes, we need to critique the canon. Yes, everybody agrees on this. Okay, so there is no second opinion, there is no third opinion, there is no fourth opinion. Everybody agrees on this proposition. Yes, the canon is not okay. It is deviant. It is hierarchical. It has excluded a lot of people, particularly women and writers of color. So it has to be set right. So the question is, how do we do this? What is the strategy? What is the methodology? What is the pedagogy? So we will talk about this in the third part of the presentation. Fine. Now the question is, things are not okay with the canon. So therefore, the canon needs to be critiqued, rewritten, and reformulated. So how do we do it? Now, all of us are aware of it, but all the same, please allow me to highlight it. It's not something new for you. Okay, so you are already aware of this because we teach post-colonial studies, so we are aware of it, but all the same, let me spell it out. So now we have two options. So what are we talking about? We are talking about critiquing the canon, rewriting the canon, and reformulating the canon. And as far as strategizing is concerned, we are left with two options, or we are left with two strategies. So the first option or the first strategy is you modify the list. Here is a list of 100 great poets. And what do you find? Okay, most of them, 90% of them are men, 90% of them are white skin, 90% of them are from a rich economic background, and they are all straight guys, men and women. Okay, fine. So what do? You remove a few names, you delete a few names, and in those vacant slots, what do? Okay, so you remove, let us say, slot number 21. Who is slot number 21? A white male. So what do? You remove that author, he or she, and in that vacant slot, you add or you insert a name from Asia, maybe from the other gender, a woman writer. So a white male has been removed, and in his place, an Asian woman writer has been included. So you come to slot number, let us say 59. So whom do you come across? You come across a white male, straight writer, heterosexual. So what do? You replace him with an African American, but a lesbian. Okay, so dear friends, I need not elaborate on this. So this is one way of rewriting the canon. So what do? This exercise consists of two parts. So the first part, you delete, you erase a few names, and those vacant slots to be filled up by new names. Okay, non-whites, women, colored, not straight, but gay or lesbian. So this is one way of rewriting or reformulating the canon. But I'm sure most of you would have realized this is too simplistic. So rewriting the canon is not as easy as it looks like, or as simple as it looks like. So this is a complex affair. Okay, so let us go to the second strategy. I said we need to rewrite the canon, and two options are available, two strategies are available. So the first one, removing a few names and those vacant slots to be filled with non-whites, women, and gays or lesbians. Fine. So, but then we found that this solution was too simplistic and therefore not acceptable. Okay, so let us turn to the other solution. And this solution was put forth by, all of us are familiar with this book that appeared in the 1980s, The Empire Writes Back, along with Edward Said's Orientalism. So this book, The Empire Writes Back, authored by three Australian critics, Ashcroft, Griffiths, and Tiffin, that inaugurated post-colonial studies in the academia. So this book, The Empire Writes Back, and also in the next book by the same three authors, Ashcroft, Griffiths, and Tiffin, and that book was titled Post-Colonial Studies, a Reader. In these two books, but primarily in The Empire Writes Back, Ashcroft, Griffiths, and Tiffin, They talk about contesting the canon. They talk about challenging the canon. Now, four schools of thought, they explicitly, directly challenge the canon. I repeat, four schools of thought, four theoretical schools, they challenge the canon. So who are they? Post-colonial critics. They challenge the canon. Why? Because it is all white. Colored writers are almost invisible. So post-colonial critics challenge the canon. Feminist critics challenge the canon. Why? It is androcentric. Cultural studies, those critics, they also challenge the canon. Why? Because the canon is hierarchical. It talks about high culture. It talks about the cultural tradition of Matthew Arnold, T.S. Eliot, and F.R. Lewis. That is from a British point of view. It is hierarchical. It is elitist. Now, those who do new historicism, they also challenge the canon. Fine. Anyway, let us come back to Ashcroft, Griffiths, and Tiffin. So I was trying to highlight the context in which these people produced this work, The Empire Writes Back. So that was in the context of post-colonial studies and post-colonial criticism. So they make out their argument very clearly and emphatically. So they argue from a post-colonial point of view, the canon needs to be critiqued, challenged, rewritten, reformulated. And the strategy that they adopt is very interesting, not like the first strategy. So what is their argument? What is the strategy that they propose? So what they propose is, don't look at the writers, whether they are male or female, whether they are whites or colored, whether they are straight or gay or lesbian. Okay, your focus should be on the parameters, on the evaluation criteria, on the yardsticks. Okay, so why is it this author is in and why is it this author is out? Okay, so look at the parameters, look at the index, look at the indices, look at the assessment tools, the assessment criteria. So according to them, the assessment tools are not okay. The evaluation criteria are not okay. They are biased, they are prejudiced. They favor the white, they favor the white men. So it is because of the prejudiced nature, the biased nature of the evaluation criteria that women and colored writers, they have been excluded from the mainstream canon. So therefore, their argument is your target should not be on the list. Your target should be the evaluation criteria, because their conclusion is if the evaluation criteria are set right, if they are fair, not biased, not prejudiced, then the chances of women getting into the canon, the chances of colored writers getting into the canon, the chances of gay and lesbian writers getting into the canon are brighter. Okay. So dear friends, it is in this context that I want to talk of the canon wars. Okay, so right now we are witnessing a prolonged and an ugly war between Russia and Ukraine, okay, which has claimed a lot of innocent civilians and destroyed millions of worth of property. So just as we have the war between two countries, we have a canon war between two camps. Okay, so it is in this context that I would like to talk about. I would like to draw your attention to three important books. But before that, a word about who inaugurated this discussion, who initially talked about the dismantling of the Western canon, who talked about the biased nature of the canon, who talked about the prejudiced nature of the canon, and who said first that the canon, the boundaries of the canon should be expanded. So dear friends, it was Paul Lauter, Lauter, Paul Lauter, an American critic in the Chicago Convention that took place in 1973. All of us are familiar with MLA, Modern Language Association. So every year they have a convention, they have an annual convention So in 1973, the convention was held in Chicago. So it is referred to as Chicago Convention. So it was in this convention convened by the Modern Language Association, MLA, that Paul Lauter talked about canonizing non-white, non-male authors. So it was he who triggered the debate. So we are thankful to him. We are grateful to him because it was Paul Lauter in 1973 pointed out that the canon is biased, it is prejudiced, it is discriminatory, it is hierarchical. So therefore, it has to be expanded. It has to be made inclusive. How? Include non-whites, include non-male authors. So this was 1973. Dear friends, I promised to talk about three important writers and three important books. Okay, so the first book that I would like to talk about is titled Closing of the American Mind. It was published by Simon and Schuster, New York in 1987, and the author is Alan Bloom. I have already referred to Harold Bloom, so this is a different author, even though the surname are identical. He is Bloom and this person also is Bloom, but the first name is different. So he is Harold Bloom. I have talked about his monumental work, The Western Canon. This is Alan Bloom. So Alan Bloom was an academic, a philosopher, and in 1987, his book bearing the title Changing of the American Mind was published, and instantly it became a bestseller. And if you look at the statistics, the statistical data show us that more than 500,000 books were sold out. Surprising, fine. Now, what is the theme of this book? The theme of this book, if I can put it in one sentence, who is Alan Bloom? Of course, he is the author of the book Closing of the American Mind. But apart from that, that is in the context of this book, I would say Alan Bloom was a strong supporter of liberal education and great books. I repeat, he was a staunch supporter. He was a strong supporter. He was a strong advocate of liberal education and great books. Unfortunately, we don't have liberal education in our institutions, even if they study humanities, whether it is sociology or philosophy or anthropology or related subjects. We don't give them, we don't teach them a course in liberal education. But whereas in the West, as we all know, they have a 4-year undergraduate program, and irrespective of your subject, irrespective of your discipline, everyone has to go through a paper or course in liberal education and great books. So this book, bearing the title Closing of the American Mind, authored by Alan Bloom and published in 1987, talks about the advantages, the merits, the positive side of offering the students, particularly the undergrads, liberal education and great books. And what are these great books? Canonical books, canonical texts. Okay, so this book appeared in 1987. So the major argument is, I'll just read out one sentence, and this is, you will find this on page number 344. Just one sentence, and the context is, he advocates liberal education. Liberal education means like you read Plato, you read Aristotle, you read Immanuel Kant, you read Martin Heidegger, you read a little bit of Dante, you read a little bit of Homer. So this is liberal education. Okay, a little bit of literature and a little bit of philosophy and a little bit of sociology and anthropology as well, but primarily literature and philosophy. So this quote is from Alan Bloom, a short one. I will read it out for you. Wherever the great books make up a central part of the curriculum, the students are excited and satisfied, feel they are doing something that is independent and fulfilling, getting something from the university they cannot get elsewhere. So he makes it mandatory that colleges and universities, higher educational institutions should teach great books. great literary text and great philosophical text, otherwise known as liberal education. Fine. Now, dear friends, in this context, I talked about the war between Russia and Ukraine. So similarly, in the domain of canon, in the domain of literature, we have a canon war. So if it is a war, if it is a battle, we need two sides. So what are the two sides and what do they represent? So we have traditionalists on the one hand and you have multiculturalists on the other. So what are the two warring camps? Who are the opposing camps? Who are the enemies? So you have traditionalists on the one hand, and on the other, opposed to them are the multiculturalists. Now, who are the traditionalists? Traditionalists, and what is their motto? What is their philosophy? And in the same vein, in the same breath, who are the multiculturalists and what is their plea? What is their philosophy? Now, the traditionalists, their argument is we should maintain the purity of the canon. I repeat, the traditionalists are those critics, those writers and those critics who claim there is no need to expand the canon. Right now, there is no need to include women writers, to include colored writers, to include gay writers, to include lesbian writers, because if you do it, that would spoil the purity of the canon, that will contaminate or defile the canon. Purity. So the traditionalists, they do not want the canon to be expanded. Why? Because they want to maintain the purity of the canon. But on the contrary, we have multiculturalists, and their argument is, look at the term multiculturalist. They advocate a philosophy of cultural pluralism. So they would say, bring in more writers, particularly women writers, colored writers, gay writers, lesbian writers. Let us expand, let us broaden, let us widen the horizons, the frontiers of the canon, and let us make it multicultural. Okay? But then the traditionalists accuse the multiculturalists. This is an aesthetic issue. This is a literary issue. Why do you want to politicize this issue? So the question is, aesthetics or expansion? So it is in this context, I promised that I would refer to 3 books. I have already referred to 1 book authored by Bloom, Alan Bloom. Now the second book that I want to refer to very briefly is by Henry Louis Gates. All of us are familiar with Gates, Gates, is one of the editors of the Norton Anthology of African American Literature, a great writer. So Oxford University Press published his book titled Loose Cannons, Loose, Loose Cannons, Notes on the Culture Wars. And this was published by OUP, Oxford University Press, in 1992. I would recommend that you read the second chapter. Okay, you need not read the entire book, but if you have time and energy, please go through the second chapter. The second chapter, of course, the first chapter is interesting and witty. Okay, in the first chapter, he answers a very important question. Who canonizes authors? Okay, I promise to answer this question. Who canonizes authors? Who canonizes poets? Who canonizes novelists? Who canonizes essayists? Who canonizes short story writers? Now, the answer is very interesting, and the answer is political as well, not just academic. Okay, who canonizes authors? I am sure immediately you would answer, of course, the critics. Okay, a critic is one who says, oh, this is a great book. He says, wow, this is a fantastic book. This is a wonderful book. It should be in everyone's library. It should be prescribed. So it is usually the critic who canonizes a particular writer. Okay, now the question is, and this is what Henry Louis Gates talks about in the first chapter of his book, Loose Cannons. Okay, so he raises a very naughty and a mischievous question. Do you think the critic alone decides who should be in and who should be out? So he says, what about the publishing companies? Okay, more than the critic, more than the reader, the publishing companies, marketing strategy, advertisement, they get favorable reviews published. They bribe critics. Please write a favorable review of this book. and they write to heads of departments, they write to members of boards of studies, please prescribe this book in your curriculum. So the publishers, they play a key role in canonizing authors. Anyway, that's a different question. So let us come back to this book by Henry Louis Gates. The title is Loose Cannons, Notes on the Culture Wars. So he talks about making the canon plural. He talks about making the canon multicultural. So dear friends, I said I will talk about 3 books. So the first is Alan Bloom, the second is Henry Louis Gates, the third of course is Harold Bloom. I have already talked about him, the Western canon, and he talks about the canon from a different point of view because he was averse, he was against cultural studies. All of us are aware of the Birmingham Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, launched in 1964. We talk of Richard Hoggett, the first director, Stuart Hall, the second director. We talk about all this. Now, Bloom was a fierce critic of cultural studies, and he said, the School of Cultural Studies, they are diluting the idea of literature. So what is literature? Even the very question, the important question, the key question, that is being diluted by cultural studies. So in that context, where the whole idea of literature itself is undergoing a lot of changes, then how do you define the canon? Okay, so dear friends, that was the third part of my presentation. So in the second part of my presentation, I established that the canon is androcentric, Eurocentric, bourgeois, and homophobic. Therefore, they need to critique it, they need to challenge it, they need to rewrite it, and they need to reformulate it. How do we do it? I talked about the strategies suggested by the authors of the Empire Rights Pact, and I also talked about the canon war between traditionalists who want to maintain the purity of the canon and the multiculturalists who want the canon to be inclusive, not hierarchical, not discriminatory. Now, dear friends, let me come to the last part of my presentation. Okay, I will take 5 minutes, then maybe we will have another 5 minutes for questions and answers. Now, all of us are teachers. Maybe we are teaching in colleges, maybe some of us are teaching in universities. Some of you may be heading departments, and some of you may be members of boards of studies in English of either your own institutions or elsewhere. And some of you may be members of the academic council of your own institution or elsewhere, which ratifies the changes suggested by the members of the Board of Studies in English. So therefore, as teachers, as syllabus designers, as curriculum framers, we have a great responsibility when it comes to the canon. So I will talk about 3 major responsibilities. I have listed 5, but I have time to talk about only 3. Fine. Now, as teachers, when I walk into my first year MA classroom, or when I meet my second year MA students, okay, when I talk to them about literature, when I teach them literature, I should encourage them to have or to develop a personal canon. Now, what is there in the syllabus? What is there in the syllabus for the first semester, for the second semester, for the third semester, for the fourth semester, willy-nilly, whether they like it or not, whether they accept it or reject it, they have to study because it is in the syllabus. But beyond the syllabus, outside the syllabus, they should have their personal canon. Okay, so I walk into my class, I ask them, who is your favorite poet? They should have an answer. Who is your favorite film director? They should have an answer. Which is your favorite novel and why? So they should be able to justify as well. It is because of these reasons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that so-and-so is my favorite author. It is because of these reasons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that I consider this novel as my most favorite novel. Could be in English, could be in Hindi, could be in Marathi. So please encourage your students to develop or to have their own personal canon. And as teachers, you please curate the list for them. So this is the first one. Now, second one, when you talk about the syllabus, when you talk about the curriculum, when you revise your own college or university syllabus or curriculum, or when you go to other institutions as experts, as expert members of the Board of the Studies in English, please ensure that the canon is inclusive, not discriminatory. The canon is inclusive. Now, dear friends, I'll give you two examples. Now, 2 months ago, I went to a university. I want to emphasize it was not a college, it was a university. I went to a college as an expert member of the Board of Studies in English, and we are talking about semester one we completed, looking at the content of semester one. Now we were looking into the text prescribed in semester two, and the paper was American literature. Okay, so please remember, this is a university, this is MA curriculum, and we were scrutinizing the content of the paper bearing the title American literature. Now I was horrified. I repeat, I was horrified looking at the content. So why was I horrified? What was wrong with the content? There was not a single African American writer. Now we have so many outstanding African American poets, men and women. You have Rita Dow, you have Langston Hughes, you have Maya Angelou. And when it comes to novel, you have Pulitzer Prize winning novelists, you have Nobel Prize winning novelists, Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Paul Marshall. But they have not included any African American writer. This was a university PG curriculum. I said, look at your syllabus. It is all white authors. Where are the African Americans? Then they realized. So this was one instance. I'll give you one more example. I am an assessor for NAC for more than 12 years. Recently, I visited a college. It was a women's institution. I repeat, this is no exaggeration. This is a real story, a real anecdote. I went to a women's college. I went to the Department of English, because when we go on NAC visits, we listen to presentations and we also interact with members of departments. We visit departments. So I visited the Department of English, and on the wall, I could find photos of 20 or 25 great authors. Now I had a look at all those photos and I was horrified. This is the second time I'm using this word horrified. Now, why was I horrified? What was the reason? The reason was it was a women's institution, but I did not find a single photo of a woman writer. It was all male. Of course, they were Indians. They had the picture of Tagore. Okay, but it was a women's institution, but they did not think of honoring any woman writer. Okay, so dear friends, the second responsibility is when we revise the syllabus or the curriculum, either of your own institution or elsewhere, please ensure that the canon is not discriminatory. Instead, the canon should be inclusive. Now, the third point and the last point. Okay, sir, you suggested that we should include women authors. We have included women authors. Last time you suggested we have to include some Dalit writers. We have included some Dalit novels. Fine. Now, that is not enough. But the point is, I have personally come across teachers and institutions and departments where they have included Dalit literature. They have included texts by who are the great Marathi novelists, Limbale and others. But the way they teach, it is like they are teaching a mainstream text. In other words, they teach women's writing in India, they teach women's literature, or they teach Dalit literature, but they do not talk about identity politics. They do not talk about oppositional reading. Then what is the point in including these oppositional texts? You have included Dalit literature, you have included Dalit novels, but then if you don't talk about identity politics, if you don't talk about ideology, then what is the point in prescribing these texts? So which means ensure two things. Number one, ensure that the canon is not discriminatory. Instead, it is inclusive. It does justice to women and to the subaltern writers. But at the same time, when you talk about a woman's text, okay, Fetterly talks about a resisting reader. That should be a woman. Okay, Dalit literature also should talk about a resisting reader, oppositional reading. Okay, so identity politics. So dear friends, I know I have taken a lot of time. Let me conclude. So I refer to Henry Louis Gates. I refer to his book, Loose Cannons. Now this time I will refer to an essay by Henry Louis Gates. The title of the essay is Whose Canon Is It Anyway? So let me conclude my presentation with a brief quote, just one sentence from Henry Louis Gates, his article entitled Whose Canon Is It Anyway? So he says, this is how he writes. The quote goes like this: to reform co-curriculums to account for the comparable eloquence of the African, the Asian, and the Middle Eastern traditions is to begin to prepare our students for their roles as citizens of a world culture. So how does he end? He says, we should train our students to become citizens of a world culture. In other words, by exposing them to the literatures of other cultures, other traditions, other languages, the other sex, the other gender, we help them to transform themselves into citizens of a world culture. Thank you. Thank you very much. My special thanks to Dr. Kapil Singhel, coordinator of this refresher course, and I also thank my friend Dr. Prantik Banerjee for this invitation. So dear friends, I have completed. In case you have any questions, I'll be happy to interact with you. Thank you.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Sir, actually, it is responsibility for the propose vote of thanks for this session.
So no questions.
Uh,
Are there any questions? I'll be happy to answer. If there are no questions, yes, you can go ahead with your vote of
So
thanks.
before vote of thanks, I would like to say this was truly a fulfilling experience.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Even I would like to add on. It was real. I was spellbound. I am at my workplace. My colleagues are, they are looking at my face and they are like, "Why are you so spellbound?" But I must say, it's very enriching, very engrossing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
so, Dr. Kapil sir has given me this wonderful opportunity to propose vote of thanks on behalf of Nagpur HRDC. Sir, I'm really indebted to you for this knowledge enriching session, which was based on canon, and it's every part of canon which you describe throughout your lecture. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us for this refresher course. And I'm also grateful to Dr. Kapil sir, who has given me this opportunity. Thank you very much, sir, once again.
Thank you, friends. We will meet again tomorrow at the same time, and tomorrow I'll be talking on Derrida and deconstruction. Thank you, and a special thanks to Dr. Kapil. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, I shall log out. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, we will immediately start with the next session. In fact, I'm not on my lappy. I'm managing through my cell phone. Has Dr. Prantik sir joined?
Not yet, sir. Not yet.
Okay. We'll wait for him. And have all of you posted on that Google Classroom the write-up on yesterday's. Hello.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Sir, this is Madhumanti. I just had a doubt that in the Google Classroom, there are two parts. One is the stream. It's like a Facebook wall page where you can post anything. And the other is the specific classwork section where you have actually posted the assignment.
There where they are posting it, na?
Yeah.
This morning, 18 people have already.
So they've been, most of the participants have been posting on the stream page. That's the first page. So we need to post it on the classwork, right? That's what I just wanted to reconfirm.
Madhumati, you got muted, I suppose.
Yeah, I can listen. Yeah, I'm on.
Google Classwork, ma'am.
Google Classwork में मैंने post किया है.
Yeah.
So I was just asking that most of the participants have posted on the stream page, that is on the very first, the wall kind of the general page which is there. So we need. I was just reconfirming whether it is okay to post on the stream page or where you have posted. It's okay to post anywhere.
You go ahead anywhere. Yeah, you do that.
Thank you.
Get it from wherever it is available. Don't worry about that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay. Please let me know when the Prantik sir joins, huh?
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes. Good afternoon to Prantik sir.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Dr. Kapil.
Yeah.
I deliberately joined 5 minutes late because I thought let the participants have a coffee break or a tea break or whatever.
Oh, okay. Well, even otherwise, now shall we start, sir? Can we start now?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. So even otherwise, sir doesn't need any kind of introduction. We all know Prantik sir quite well, and but still yesterday, Abhirami didn't leave anything. She has revealed everything. She has told everything about Prantik sir. So as he was introduced yesterday, I would request him to carry on with his session, and sir will be speaking on bodies, illness, and medicine. So over to you, Prantik sir.
Right. Thank you, Kapil sir.
Yeah.
Right. Good afternoon, friends.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good
afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
So how is it going?
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
So yesterday's session was just mind blowing.
Thank you so much.
Didn't have an opportunity to talk because I didn't have a question. It just needed time to sink in to even ask a question after such a session.
Thank you. Sorry, I mean, I'm a little lost in those styles. Your mother.
I'm Madhumanti. I'm Madhumanti, Dinesh sir's PhD student. I was introducing him yesterday.
I see. Oh, well. Two of a kind then. I had the pleasure of having my research scholar introduce me.
Okay.
And incidentally, Dr. Dinesh Nair was the examiner of my PhD.
Wow.
So yeah, so we have already connected in some way or the other. Right.
Yeah.
Right. But thank you so much for the feedback. Right. All right. I was taking a look at the again the concept note of the refresher course, and I mean, very interestingly, you have literature, you have culture, and you have technology. And in my prep, or my, shall we say, the countdown to the refresher course, I was thinking that I would actually ride my hobby horse here. I'll do a couple of sessions with you on areas that are allied to my interest, and mostly, you see, culture studies is my area of interest, something that I have been researching, writing, and even teaching. Culture studies is an elective paper that our university that our university offers to our students, and so I thought that I'll introduce another subject for you, or maybe another area, an area which I personally feel has the potential of great research. It has potential for great research, and there are plenty of researchers. All of you, I suppose, are researchers as well. And so I thought maybe I'll do something, especially on the backdrop of what we have personally experienced, both individually as well as collectively, in the times of lockdown, in the times of the coronavirus. So, friends, the title of my talk today is Body's Illness, and Medicine. Now, however, I'm not going to speak in general. I mean, this itself is a huge canvas, Body's Illness and Medicine, and I've been, I've been following a lot of webinars and e-conferences that took place during the lockdown. Since 2020, there have been plenty of webinars on the concept note on the subject that I'm dealing with, body's illness, medicine. What I intend to do, therefore, is to take you slightly off the track, which which hopefully will pique your curiosity, arouse your interest. But unlike yesterday's talk, let me share my screen first of all. Let me know if my screen is visible for you.
Yes, sir.
Right. Fine. Now that the system is
Yes, sir.
Let's get going. Okay. So this is the topic, and let's say from general medicine, my discourse will focus on a very, very specialized topic, on a very specialized area. I'm going to talk about body's illness and medicine as a discourse, as not just a medical practice, but obviously as a literary practice. And I'll take you through the trajectory of what I feel is a very interesting and rich body of work that has come up in the last 20-25 years or so. The medical memoir, and that too, I'm going to narrow the focus of my talk to even further by not only talking about medical memoirs, or what we call illness narratives, but also to a very select group, to a very select and exclusive group of writers, doctors as writers. And again, to make it even more particular and specific, not just doctors as writers, but Asian American doctors as writers, or shall we say expatriate or diasporic, or that word immigrant in diaspora, the immigrant Asian American doctor writers. Okay, so I'd like to begin with a quote here. That is, this is from a very, very seminal work, which I will refer to a little later, but I'll ask you to take 1 minute to pause and read this quote and just let it sink. It is by Susan Sontag in a book called Illness as Metaphor. And what the quote reads is, illness, she says, is the night side. Illness is the night side of life, a more onerous citizenship. Everyone who is born holds dual citizenship in the kingdom of the well and in the kingdom of the sick. Although we all prefer to use the good passport, sooner or later, each of us is obliged, at least for a spell, to identify ourselves as citizens of that other place. This is a very interesting, it's a very interesting line, simply because from a book called Illness as Metaphor, illness itself is being talked about as the other space, or as the other country. It's not no country for old men, but it is a country or a space, an imaginary country or an imaginary topography, which we all inhabit sometime or the other in our lives. So perhaps, unfortunately, but perhaps over a protracted period of time, especially when we come down with some critical ailment or disease or even disability. And what, therefore, Sontag reminds us is that each one of us in our own lifetime, we sort of become citizens of two kinds of kingdoms, the kingdom of well and the kingdom of the sick. And she immediately uses the trope of the other, the othering of the patient, or rather the othering of the human body, whenever the human body no longer is normal, no longer is able, whenever the human body no longer has a utilitarian value and can contribute nothing to the economics of capitalism, then this human body, that is your body and my body, is immediately stricken and labeled as the other. So there is immediately, one can discern an ideology of what we call ableism, but I'll come to that a little later. Like I said, if we pause for a minute to think about this quote by Susan Sontag, I don't think we would be wrong in calling this ongoing times as the COVIDian age, because, reports of COVID cases, of positive people turning positive, still goes on. And it was during this period from, nearly 2.5 years that so much has been talked about, so much has been discussed and debated and written about in terms of pandemics and plagues and illnesses. Like I was referring to the many webinars and e-conferences that we have, along with this entire discourse, which sort of has intensified with its focus on disease, sickness, illness, and its treatment, not just the treatment of the disease, but the treatment of human bodies itself. The body as not just anatomy, the body not just as anatomy, but a body which loses the autonomy of the anatomy when it comes under the purview, or when it comes under the lens, or shall we say the stethoscope of a specialized doctor. So, Foucault's birth of the clinic is something where he talks about how body politic, the body politics and the body polity are two sides of the same coin, where our bodies are not only just flesh and blood, but our bodies also are statistics. They are part of census, they are part of statistics. And in the medical sciences, our bodies therefore turn immediately from living beings, breathing beings into patient. And that word patient itself sort of labels and slots you into giving you a particular identity, which Susan Sontag would rightly call the other identity, the identity of the other. Anyway, it's been in the last 2.5 years, whenever we think of disease or illness narratives, to begin with, we talked about, when the COVID-19 broke out, many of us went back to literature, and we went trying to find out those classics or those writings from, right from this 15th and 16th century onwards to contemporary, where, we read Daniel Defoe, from Daniel Defoe to Mary Shelley's, and to contemporary writers like Cormac McCarthy and Stephen King. All of these writers were brought back, were dusted perhaps from our bookshelves if they were lying at the back, behind the more frequently referred books. Remember yesterday's talk, the bookishness at its limits. So we dusted and even bought new books, right from Daniel Defoe's The Plague Diaries to Mary Shelley's The Last Ride, to Cormac McCarthy and Stephen King. All of these writers made a comeback. Generally, however, I mean, the exploration of arts and humanities, particularly in the last 2.5 years, has tried to represent and critique illness itself. It has tried to provide a very post-humanist kind of critique of the pathology of disease, the pathology of sick bodies, the pathology of medicine. And sometimes these narratives have often, shall I say, scared us out of our wits, or even sent a chill down our spine by depicting apocalyptic scenarios, like what the COVID-19 previously 2 years back threatened to do, that when it was called, for the first time, it was called a pandemic, a global outbreak. During the lockdown, so all of us read, we watched movies, and we read books, all on narratives on illness and medicine. And in fact, even before the pandemic, even before the COVID-19 crisis hit us hard, there was a sort of an explosion of interest in the previous 2 decades in the literary representations of illness, the literary representations of medical history. Whereas earlier, you see, these, what I call illness narratives were mostly used to be the preserve of patients. I mean, think of much of the writings that happened in the past by those who suffered terminal illness, what we call terminal illness, critical illness, or those who were crippled and bedridden. Many of them often took recourse to writing diaries and journals, but which were not conventionally considered to be a literary form or a literary genre. So they were not these medical narratives or illness narratives were not written by witnesses, by family members, by caregivers, but by those who lived in and through pain, suffering, and trauma. In the course of the last 30 years or so, narratives of illness have developed, various kinds of writings, including exploring the many genres and the many kinds of writings. So there has been illness narratives that have been written in the form of prose writing, particularly in fiction. So there have been enough number of novels that can actually spill over from your bookshelf, or even fill an entire library on disease, medicine, and treatment. Non-fiction, the categories of writings under non-fiction particularly has been a very, very rich source for those who were down with illness to turn their experiences of illness and disease into non-fictional writings, and by that I mean autobiography and memoir. if you look at the trajectory, or sort of present an overview of the history of medical writing turned into stories. When I say medical writings, I now mean illness narratives, that is, stories about sickness, disease, patients, and treatment. Then these stories of sickness over a period of time, as I said, has diversified. Earlier, they were primarily written by patients, sufferers, but now, in at least in the last 20, 30 years, more and more doctors and caregivers and family members have written to produce not just medical records or a medical account, but turn to literature, turn to the forms of literature in order to tell their stories. In fact, it was in the beginning of the 1980s that a stream of books appeared with their focus on illness and medicine. And some of these books have been written by the best of 20th century writers, the best of contemporary writers. I mean, what you see on your slide are just three examples that I've given. John Updike's book, Self-Consciousness, written in 1989. And this book, unlike his modernist fiction, unlike his popular bestsellers, is actually takes us through. Updike takes us through his personal struggle with psoriasis, a sort of an infectious skin disease, which often breaks out on people's bodies, on their skins, in the form of pustules and novels and bowels and stuff like that. And then, of course, you have the classic, one of the most iconic cult texts, William Styron's Darkness Visible, which is again a memoir, where the writer, in a very, very candid, in fact, in a very brutally candid manner, leaves an account of his struggles with depression, the onset of madness, and even suicidal thoughts. William Styron's Darkness Visible is considered to be a classic or a cult novel, a cult example of what we call the medical memoir. And however, it was, I think, the first book that you see on your slide. It was in 1993. John Bailey, this English writer, husband of Iris Murdoch, came out with a book called Iris, a memoir of Iris Murdoch. A memoir of Iris Murdoch. Once again, I mean, it was about those of us who are familiar with Iris Murdoch's work. Remember her to be one of the exemplars of modernist fiction, including the book The Sea, for which she won the Booker Prize. Well, John Bailey, her husband, it's a husband who wrote about Iris, because late in her career, when she already, I think, had turned around 70 or so, she came down with Alzheimer's. And with the onset of Alzheimer's, her life completely spinned out of control, debilitating her very capacity as a writer to spin tales, that she seemed to lose. She seemed to lose her grip, not only over her mind, but also on her ability to communicate. And so Bailey's account of Iris Murdoch, his wife's struggle to cope with Alzheimer, is a very, very moving and touching account. This was also turned into a film. This book, Iris, was turned into a film in 2001 or 2002, where Judi Dench played the role of Iris Murdoch. Anyway, I think it was it was during the mid-80s, starting from the mid-1980s to 1993, which I consider a landmark in terms of this particular book, Iris, that came out. It has seen the emergence of illness narrative within the mainstream of what we call literary writing. Whereas earlier it was considered to be marginal. Earlier, accounts of disease and treatment and medicine, all of these were considered to be purely, the subject matter of medical sciences. scientific reports, medical sciences. Now, with the increase in the number of writers, including patients, caregivers, and family members, giving us moving and graphic accounts of illness and the struggle, and sometimes even the triumph of patients, of their near and dear ones over a critical illness, now has put the medical memoir or the illness narrative within from the margin to the mainstream, and it is now considered to be a very, very rich and prolific kind of writing. And that should immediately grab the attention of researchers out here, because this is like I said, a very, very uh, uh, inviting, tempting, interdisciplinary area of doing research. Anyway, the illness narratives, however, since we are in a refresher course where we are talking about the interventions or the mediation of literature and culture through technology, you could say that when the internet happened, or with the wide dispersion of social media in the 21st century, I mean, these days you only have to look at what people are putting up on Facebook, Instagram, or even on Twitter, and so many fit into our definition of illness narratives that I shall give you in a bit. So, a lot of patients and patients forming groups on social media, sharing their experience, sharing their illness, their symptoms, their experience of doctors, and sometimes, in fact, helping each other by giving details of advanced medicine and doctors, and also forming support groups. These have been the many ways in which the internet has become a sort of has provided a space, or rather a platform on cyberspace, which allows those any patient who was considered to be an outsider, the other, because of a disabled body or a crippled mind, to share care and get the support of fellow sufferers or fellow patients. So in my talk today, well, this is the pathology of my talk. Or rather, you could break, I what do we gain when we study literature from the perspective of illness narratives? How do different genres of literature treat illness differently? And then towards the end of my talk, I deal with a very specific case of what I said earlier about medical memoirs or illness narratives being written by Asian American physicians or Asian American doctors. So what is an illness? What is an illness narrative? Well, the form of illness narrative, you would consider it first as a kind of life writing. Life writing is the generic label that we give to autobiographies, biographies, diary writing, journal writing, etc., etc. Illness narratives the medical memoir would fall in the broad category of life writing. I mean, in that sense, it is a very, very capacious category. It is, and you could compare it as a sort of diary writing, journal writing, biographical writing, these, and also blog writing on one's illness. All of it is shows to you the very, very protean form, the very, very flexible and expansive form that illness narrative has. In a sense, illness narrative is a label that defines itself not by just what is included, what we can include in it, but we can also exclude. But to put it simply, an illness narrative is a narrative about illness. And as illness, as generally has, as I said, been treated as considered to be an invisible, a sort of an invisible marginal theme in the whole body of literature, in the corpus of literature. Illness has seldom been considered as the great so-called great themes of literature, like wars, famines, natural disasters, catastrophes. And so compared to what the big themes or the big subjects of great literature or canonical literature or classic literature, uh, well, illness seems to be not, not, it doesn't fall into the same bracket as great theme. And it is perhaps in its invisibility, its marginality, illness in its invisibility, its marginality, um, we may read in it, we may read, man's, our own innate fear, and anxiety of illness. Plus the fact, you see, that traditionally writing about diseases and its treatment, about medical histories, has always been believed to belong to the domain of medical sciences, of pure science, so-called pure sciences. So, however, as I gave you a brief picture, illness narratives, with the proliferation, with more and more people taking to the narrative form in order to represent their experience of illness of various kinds, illness narratives today may legitimately be considered to be a sub-genre of literature. Now, if you ask me what really are the characteristics of, if we consider all illness narratives as a body of work, then can we single out, or can we identify some features, some characteristics which are unique to illness narrative as a sub-genre of literature? Let me try and list for you some of these characteristic features. Well, illness narratives are not really about the common flu. It's not about that every sneeze and every cough leads to the writing of an illness narrative. In most cases, these medical memoirs or illness narratives, they sort of examine the big illnesses, shall I say, the big diseases, or rather, the emperor of maladies. This is a title of a book by Siddharth Mukherjee. And the emperor of illnesses, or the emperor of maladies, by that he means cancer. So many of these illness narratives are about cancer, but illness narratives have also been written on madness, on depression, on schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, any kind of illness which is debilitating, which is disruptive, and which puts the patient right at the center of a medical discourse. So illness narratives, therefore, are about such serious illness. The second feature that one may identify in order to define illness narrative is perhaps that these narratives are, you don't go to a medical journal, you wouldn't go to a medical journal to read illness narrative. So which means that there is a basic difference between a medical report and an illness narrative. And what is that? Well, the primary effect, the primary purpose of an illness narrative is affective and reflective. It is the manner in which writers who write about their own personal case histories or about other people, other patients, their ability to transmute the cold clinicality of disease into, literary tropes, into literary modes, into literary strategies. So whether we are talking about the language of imagination, or we are talking about the rhetorical figures of metaphor and personification, well, these are the narrative tropes or the rhetorical devices by which illness narrative writers turn what is a medical history into a story. by imparting to their record of an illness an aesthetic dimension. And so you could say that illness narratives, once again, arguably can be considered as mainstream literature because these narratives often display the same form, the same structure, the same stylistic elements of novelistic fiction. A third distinguishing feature of illness narrative would be that it is often personal, autobiographical, subjective, and confessional. Illness narratives are intensely personal, sometimes brutally honest, and sometimes, therefore, can be disturbing to read also. A fourth is illness narratives, as I said, can be fiction writing, it can be non-fiction. Lately, however, in fact, during the pandemic, I came upon, while I was researching on medical humanities, I came upon illness narratives in the form of graphic novels, that is, visual representations or text and visual representations of illness narratives. So there is a subcategory within the illness narrative or the medical memoir. These days, a lot of graphic artists, graphic writers, and illustrators are collaborate with writers to give you stories of illness and its experience through visual art as well as text. Illness narratives, therefore, they can also run, they can be as long as, they can be as short as an essay. I mean, length, in fact, is no yardstick to measure whether an illness narrative qualifies to be a literary work or not. But sometimes they can be like an essay, they can be in the form of a book length. I mean, I'm immediately reminded of two examples. One, that during during the pandemic, we had seen how we had seen Arundhati Roy. I'd read Arundhati Roy's essay, which appeared, I think, in the New York Times, called "The Pandemic is the Portal." Now, that was a length, that was about some 6,000 words. And at the same time, you had Slavoj Zizek, the very famous philosopher, postmodern philosopher, giving us a book, within I think 6 weeks. It took him 6 weeks to come out with a book called Panic or Pandemic, punning on that word panic and pandemic. So you have illness narratives, can be book length features, can be books, or they can be feature length essays, such as Arundhati Roy's essay, the Pandemic is a Portal. The tone of writing, also illness narratives, a variety of tones can be detected in illness narratives. Sometimes writers treat the subject of illness depending upon what they are experiencing, what mood they are in. It can vary from anger, bitterness, and resentment to sheer bewilderment, or, illness narratives often are also triumphant tales. How patients or the protagonists of illness narratives have fought, and against all odds have triumphed over the disease. So from stoic acceptance and triumphal celebration, we have a variety of tones that we find in the way in which writers treat this rather solemn and, shall I say, morbid subject of illness. Okay. Oh yeah. On your slide, what you also see is that, if you look at illness narratives, writings that have come in the last 20 years or so, you would put works such as Philip Roth's Patrimony, A True Story, and Gillian Rose's Love's Work, Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking. I mean, these are already called cult classics. I joined during the session of Dr. Joseph Dorai Raj, and he was giving us such a wonderful explication, such a wonderful lecture on canon, on canonical literature. So you might consider at least, if not Philip Roth's Patrimony, but Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking. These two books The Year of Magical Thinking, and Blue Nights. All books are about illness. And Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking is is perhaps now being called a canonical text within the field of medical humanities. All right, but there are, as I said, there have been examples of writers. This is at the top end of the spectrum on illness narratives, but there is also the very famous, or shall I say, infamous case of somebody named James Frey, who wrote this book called A Million Little Pieces. A Million Little Pieces. This also was a medical memoir which came out in 2003, and I, in fact, grabbed a first copy of this particular book. And the book it's a graphic account of, it's a heartrending, not just a graphic, not just an explicit, but a heartrending account of how James Frey coped up with with manic depression, and also his own addiction to alcohol and crack cocaine. And it has, it gives you, it gives you pages and pages of, for example, his visits to the dentist, and the excruciating manner, because he was allergic to anesthesia, to Novocaine. So he had his teeth removed without any anesthesia. Well, and those are the pages that you actually, recoil in horror, that how could one even write about such giving us such morbid details. But anyway, this book, James Frey's A Million Little Pieces, went on to be selected by Oprah Winfrey in her television show Book Club. And then it topped the New York Times bestseller, and it was there at the top for 15 weeks. Now, what makes this particular book so infamous is also that within weeks of its publication, which made the writer James Frey an Australian world famous, or a sort of a celebrity writer, was also how quickly it was found out that what he put in the book, within the pages of his book, claiming to be a graphic and faithful, or a faithful, authentic account of his own medical history, was actually all faked up. It was all cooked up by him, and he never really suffered from any kind of disease. And so Frey became much maligned, and the book was also, brought down from the bestsellers list, and everybody lost a lot of faith in the production, the writing of medical fiction. Anyway, one of the questions that one might ask, therefore, is that, why do we actually study? Why study illness narratives? Why should we, as students of literature, as teachers of literature, why should we even study illness narratives? And I think I can give you an example, one reason from a specific example. I started my talk today with Susan Sontag, and I go back to Susan Sontag. In 1978, this was a book that she wrote in 1978, Illness as Metaphor. And she wrote the book when she herself was suffering from cancer. She survived cancer, and so she is a survivor. She is a cancer survivor. But what is interesting is that in this book, Illness as Metaphor, the first book is Illness as Metaphor. What you see on the slide is a sequel to that book called AIDS and Its Metaphors. What Susan Sontag did in this book, Illness as Metaphor, was to show how illness, our notion of illness is surrounded by metaphors and myths, especially about cancer. Because cancer, remember earlier, the word cancer was considered to be like the plague. And so the more things were being written about cancer in a figurative way, the more narratives about cancer were coming out, circulating the idea of cancer through myths and metaphors. The more patients suffering from cancer were, socially were being targeted as they were socially being targeted, they were ostracized, they were alienated as if they had become untouchable. Sontag, in her book Illness as Metaphor, seeks to demythify this, the fallacies or the wrong notions about surrounding cancer, that cancer is, is a punishment from the gods to the patient. And she shows what cancer really is, that it is just a disease. And cancer, therefore, she argues in the book, is not a curse at all. It is certainly not a punishment, and cannot therefore be a cause or a reason for socially boycotting cancer patients. And it can, in fact, cancer is curable if treatment is quick and treatment is so it was, if you look at the history again, at the context in which Sontag's book came out, it was in the 1980s. Her second book came out in 1984 or 85, the AIDS, on the AIDS, just when the AIDS epidemic had broken out in the United States. What Sontag wrote in Illness as Metaphor, she extended the argument of that earlier book into this book, the second book, AIDS as Metaphor. And she highlighted how the outbreak of this new disease, the manner in which the outbreak of this new disease, remember in 1980s, AIDS was still an unresearched, unheard of disease. And when it broke out in huge numbers, how quickly people suffering from AIDS were again they were socially discriminated, they were boycotted, and gays and Afro-American people were made the subject of racist and sexist abuse. Sontag, therefore, points out the many ways in which narratives on AIDS uses myths and metaphors in order to make the case for patients of AIDS even worse. Post-1980s, post-AIDS America, what we see, therefore, are a variety of illness narratives now coming forth in the form of memoirs, essays, novels, and autobiographies. And so, no wonder when the COVID-19 hit us hard, I mean, what you have on your slide is a selection of the many kinds of writings. I mentioned Slavoj Zizek's Panic, but the first medical memoir that came out in 2020 was the Wuhan Diaries by this Chinese writer named Fang Fang, who herself was a resident of Wuhan. And remember how Wuhan was locked down for nearly 8 months. And so this is again Fang Fang, a resident of the city, gives us a very shall I say, a graphic account of what the people of Wuhan went through when so much was happening around the world. These writings, friends, all of these writings, why again the question of why study illness narratives, writings such as this that you see on your slide? Well, these writings, both from the past as well as present, we have personally experienced how these writings have helped people ride over the crisis caused by the COVID-19 virus, because the reading and the writing of these texts have demonstrated, they are the ones that give us, they are the ones that give us the understanding and sensitivity to rediscover the humanness. When we read these stories, we sort of went back. They helped us in rediscovering our humanity, our very humanity, and how these stories inspired us to reach out to people in order to help and support, especially families that were stricken with COVID-19, or people who even lost their near and dear one. All in all, the COVID-19 itself shows the primacy of illness narratives and how vital is the role of illness narratives in sustaining individuals, in sustaining communities in times of peril and precarity. So as Slavoj Zizek, there is a quote in the middle of that slide that says that literary narratives about illness, about fiction and non-fiction allow us to explore the complex meaning of human fragility and mortality. So what illness narratives, why study illness narratives? I think the reason being very simple, that it is through our readings of illness narratives that we are able to grapple not only with the physiological ailment, but grapple with the kind of existential dilemma that illnesses put us into. Completely, we are able, illness narratives also give us hope and solace that we can conquer and triumph over any kind of illness or any kind of critical moment. So yeah, so far so good. Are you with me, friends?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In the next section, what I intend to do is to actually give you the critical theory or the theoretical framework. Ever since illness narrative has become a rich, as I said, corpus of items in literature, it has also drawn the attention of many critics or many theorizations on illness narratives. Not surprisingly, those who theorize about illness narratives are also people who are from the field of medicine. And one of the foremost theorists is this person named Rita Sharon. Rita Sharon, he is a surgeon based in Columbia University, but also with a PhD in literature. Yeah, so she is not only a doctor, but she also has a PhD in literature, and she came out with this book, path-breaking book, shall I say, Narrative Medicine, Honoring the Stories of Illness. Why I call this a path-breaking book is because Sharon, Rita Sharon, is perhaps one of the first specialists from the field of medicine who gives to us a book in which she blends together her own clinical experiences treating patients with borrowing ideas, insights, and writings from many other non-allied disciplines, such as literature, literary theory, bioethics, and cultural criticism. So she's probably she's the first theorist or the first critique who brought together, who melded together these what are traditionally considered to be disparate fields, literature and medical and medicine, and brought them to write about them, to analyze about them in this path-breaking book, Narrative Medicine. Sharon's, remember that she is a doctor. She's a doctor, and so her overall argument in the book is that healthcare, the whole industry of healthcare, that healthcare service works best when it is humanized by caring for people, by listening to the stories that patients have to tell. If medicine is to turn humane, if healthcare is to turn human, then it's important, she points out, that it's important for doctors, nurses, and the medical, and you could say even the frontline workers in the medical industry to listen to the stories that patients tell. So indeed, the subtitle of our book, Honoring the Stories of Illness, itself points to the idea, to the argument that I just said. So in the book, Sharon actually defines what she means by narrative medicine, and what the second point is. The second bullet point is it's that she defines narrative medicine as medicine that is practiced with the skills of recognizing, absorbing, interpreting and being moved by the stories of illness. And what she urges in this book, that she urges all medical practitioners, doctors, nurses, and other medical workers. She calls for them to inculcate or to think of a new narrative frame for medicine, for medical treatment, or for medical service. Her postulating that only when clinical practices are turned into human stories can patients be treated properly, that patients can be healed and not just cured. Because she says that medical treatment and storytelling have one thing in common. What a reader is to a storyteller, the patient, what the reader is to a storyteller, the patient must be to the doctor. A good listener. A good reader is a good listener, and so must a patient, or so must a doctor be to the patient. It is when, what she urges, therefore, is that it is when a doctor combines his medical competence with narrative competence, not just medical competence, not just medical expertise, but when he combines two competencies, medical competency with narrative competency. And by narrative competency, she means not only the ability to narrate and to storify, but also to listen to other people's stories. It is only when doctors combine narrative competence with medical competence can they help patients to conquer fear, anxiety, and shame of illnesses, if not the disease itself. So that, in a way, answers the question with which I began. Why study illness narratives? We study illness narratives because these narratives are life-giving. These narratives enable doctors and patients to understand what compassion is, what hope is, and how illness is not just about sick bodies, but illness puts the human at the center. So narration is healing, according to her, because it frees the human subject simply from being treated like a body, and it frees medicine also from being a machine. So these are some of the books that she has written, and I already talked about narrative medicine. The other book is The Principles and Practices of Narrative Medicine. We don't really have time, but Arthur Frank, those of you who are interested in reading further on medical narratives and critical theory, well, you can look at Arthur Frank's book, The Wounded Storyteller. Okay. So what I'm now going to do is look at what I began by saying, that I'll focus on the medical memoirs of Asian American physicians. These medical memoirs are written largely by physicians who. There's this book called Pedagogies of Woundedness. This is a book that I went to when I was reading up for today's talk. And this book places an argument that medical memoirs written in the United States, particularly in the last 2 decades, were, first of all, mostly by Asian American physicians. And these Asian American physicians, according to James Lee, the writer of this book, Pedagogies of Woundedness, he says that these Asian American physicians belong to what he calls the model minority community. Now, what is, or who does he mean when he says model minority community? You see, since the 1960s and the 70s, US, when you look at the US medical profession, uh, Asian American medical practitioners have constituted an overwhelming majority. Although Asian Americans in America are a minority population, but within the medical industry, almost every third doctor in the United States is an Asian American, or is somebody of Asian descent, and that's a very interesting statistic. That when you talk about the American health industry, uh, the biggest game changers, or the biggest health providers are people who belong to India. Well, not just India, I say South Asian Americans as well, but India, Hong Kong, Singapore, China, even China and Korea. So, according to this model minority community, what is this model minority? See, this is a label that is used for all those people from South Asia and Far East Asia who migrated since the 1960s, who migrated to the US in order to launch highly successful careers in the health service, in the health sector. But at the same time, these are also the model minority community members are also those who not only are doctors, but who have had a huge role, an influential role in sort of influencing on American public health policy as well as their social and cultural life. So these doctors, the writers, especially these two writers, whose works you see on the slide, Michelle Au and Anthony Yoon, they all are, one is a Chinese immigrant and the other is a Korean. These are figures who represent the classic model minority story, what James Lee calls the classic model minority story in his book, Pedagogies of Independence. When you think of what is this classic model minority story, think about how, I'm sure within your own family, or at least friends who have sent their children, whose children have gone to the United States and have successfully, they've probably done they've done their medicine, their MBBS from Ames, and then have gone on to the United States for a doctorate degree and have become doctors there, highly successful doctors with a roaring practice. Now, such examples of not just Indian doctors, but Asian doctors, doctors with Asian origin, are people who belong to the classic model minority story, because they are the ones who have, by their genius and their grit, these are the physicians who have scripted their life stories almost like a fairy tale. Think about that. Think about that cousin or their nephew or the niece of yours whom you often refer to in your family, saying, "Dekho kitna bada doctor ban gaya videsh ja." Success stories. The story of the Asian American physician is the story of the classic minority success story, because they often show the young Asian American physician or the intern who sort of toils away in dissection, pores over books on anatomy and physiology, memorizes pathologies and diagnoses, and then deprives herself of sleep and pleasure, sacrifices even a social life in order to achieve fame, name, and success as the model Asian American successful doctor. Illness narratives, therefore, the point that that I'm trying to draw your attention to is that most of these illness narratives in the form of medical memoirs that have been written and published in the last 20 years are by doctors, highly successful doctors of Asian origin, who, first of all, who represent this model minority community or the modern minority template, and who also, through their writings, have had a profound influence on the culture and social history of the United States. Okay, let me skip a few. Yeah. Yeah. So, who are these Indian doctors, Indian doctor writers, who you could say are the biggest influencers on in American medical, in the field of American medical humanity? You see, one thing is clear. I mean, today, if you Google just Google American health, and what pops up on your screen are a list of links to names of doctors who are mostly Indians, mostly Indians. It is clear that the public face of US medicine today is decidedly South Asian, particularly Indian. And so you have, for example, what you see on your slide, Atul Gawande. Atul Gawande is a general surgeon, but he also um, is an is a writer of illness narratives. He regularly contributes to the New Yorker, and he is the author already of 4 books. One of which, Being Mortal: Medicine and what Matters in the End. Being Mortal. This was on the New York Times bestseller for 27 weeks, and his book Being Mortal has already been featured as a documentary with the same title. Jeff Bezos of Amazon and Warren Buffett, these are two of the biggest millionaires, and who represent, the U.S. capitalist success story, offered Atul Gawande a position to head a new private healthcare system in America. I mean, so these are huge stories, huge success stories about an Indian doctor going abroad, migrating to the United States, and then not only being recognized for his medical expertise, but then going on to write a series of books which makes him the public face of American health industry itself. Then you have somebody like Siddharth Mukherjee, and Siddharth Mukherjee, I mentioned earlier when I referred to cancer as the emperor of maladies. Mukherjee also is somebody who studied at Stanford University, obtained an MD from Harvard University. Absolutely, these examples of people, of Indian doctors, are absolute Ivy League success stories. Those who have gone to places like Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, and along with Atul Gawande today, Siddharth Mukherjee also is widely regarded as not only a good doctor, but also a great narrator, a great narrator of illness. And he too has had a profound impact on American public discourse on health. And the Emperor of Maladies, it carries a very interesting subtitle. It is An Emperor of Maladies. It's called A Biography of Cancer. He titles it A Biography of Cancer. And it is, again, both a professional account of the treatment of cancer, but it also at the same time is an intensely personal account of how his father and his grandfather, or both of them, happened to be patients of cancer. So this too, Siddharth Mukherjee's book, Emperor of Maladies, also was named by Time magazine as one of the top 100 books of the past century. Then you have another Indian face of the American illness narrative or the American medical history, Abraham Verghese. Abraham Verghese is an infectious disease specialist. He too went to Stanford University like Siddharth Mukherjee, and is the writer of 3 best-selling books, including a novel called the Tennis Partner. And then you have Paul Kalanithi, and you have also Prabjot Singh. Paul Kalanithi, if I have the time, I would like to share with you a few more details about his work. What this list that you see, the names that are listed on the slide, is not an exhaustive list, it's just a selection. But what it certainly confirms is the prominence of South Asian American male physicians. Yeah. None of them are women doctors, in fact. So it's a male-dominated South Asian American scene. But it does show the prominence of South Asian American doctors and surgeons who have made a mark for themselves in the health industry of contemporary US medicine. But for us, equally important that they have enjoyed considerable public influence on the national American imaginary by writing by writing stories, by writing medical memoirs. So when you have so many medical writings written not by white Americans, not by white Americans, not by white male Americans, but by Indians or writers of South Asian descent, it leads to a bunch of interesting questions. For example, what does it mean? What does it mean when a brown Asian man stands for the face of modern medicine and is also the teller of tales of illness, of health, and of treatment in the US? Is this reverse colonization? If the empire strikes back, then is the doctor also striking back, the Indian doctor striking back? So what does it mean when we think how South Asian American men are currently those doctors who are most trusted on questions about healthcare, about the experience of illness, and about suffering and healing? And thirdly, how do these writers turn their experience of medical cases, terminal illness, into a literary narrative? What rhetorical devices and figurative language do they employ to turn illness, suffering, and its treatment into the literariness of imaginative writing? Well, there's not enough time to go into the details, but I thought what I would do is to give you a sneak peek into medical memoir written by South Asian doctors as now a legitimate and established form of literature. I'll make two more points and then I'll wrap up. What comes across very strongly when you read the medical memoirs of these Asian doctors, is that in their works, they sort of marry the scientific authority of the model minority physician, the model minority, as I described earlier, the success stories of immigrant doctors who toil and work hard in order to climb up, not only in their career, not only in their profession, but to be accepted as successful people in American public, in American society. So what they do in this illness narrative seem to be that these writers marry the scientific authority that they have accumulated as experts, medical experts, with the post-colonial salve of a South Asian, of a distinctively South Asian literary cultural tradition. I'll explain what I mean, because I'm making a big argument here. We do South Asian diasporic literature. And so when we do diasporic literature, we do what? We do the Jhumpa Lahiris, the Kiran Desais, the Vikram Chandras, the Vikram Seths, etc. Given the fact that there has so much of writing emerged, so much of writing has come up on illness by South Asian diasporic doctors, what I am claiming here is to position their writings not merely as a subgenre of literature, but as a part of diasporic writing itself. Because the point really is that these South Asian American physician writers are not writing for their colleagues and they're not publishing their writings in academic medical journals. What they are doing is that they are combining the narratives of medicine with the narratives of imaginative literature in order to garner a huge readership, which is not just limited to America, but which has gone global. You see, a generation ago, it would have been impossible to imagine people with surnames such as Gawande, Varghese, Mukherjee, Kaliniti, Johar, and Gupta as paragons of US medicine. Yet today, they have sort of become household names given that the whole of America seems to know, given the fact that not just as in their roles as medical doctors, but more so in writings, in their writings, which has become popular reads by among the American people. So these are doctors who seem to know not only how to wield scalpels, but also bring the pen and the scalpel together to write such wonderful narratives. So it is in their works that even the most clinical diagnostic observation on a patient in a hospital is turned into a narrative scene of great drama, of great pathos, and great empathy. What we also get when we read from their memoirs is the multifaceted aspects of their own identity. You see, many of them are not just doctors, but particularly in the case of Paul Kaliniti, Paul Kaliniti was a neurosurgeon, and at the age of 36 years, when he was about to, embark on a highly successful career, a very promising career, he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And Kaliniti, in fact, took to writing only when he came down with this cancer, only when he came down with this stage 4 cancer, which absolutely, disrupted his entire life, threw it out of spin. So what follows in Kaliniti's life, Paul Kaliniti's life, that he wrote a medical memoir called When Breath Becomes Air. And this has become, once again, like Mukherjee's The Emperor of Maladies and Atul Gawande's Immortal, it became a bestseller, except with one difference. It became a bestseller, but by the time it became a bestseller, Paul Kaliniti, the writer, the doctor writer himself, had passed away. He was no more in this world. Paul's memoir on how makes for a very, very compelling story of how, with hope and courage, with grit and guts, he overcame, at least not in body, but in spirit, he overcame this life-sucking cancer, and turned out, made his experience, at least his experience, immortal by turning it into an illness narrative, by writing When Breath Becomes Air. So on reading such works, such as Paul Kaliniti's When Breath Becomes Air, or the other works of American doctors, I'd like to conclude my talk by drawing some inferences. One is, first of all, that when we read this emerging body of illness narratives by South Asian American physicians like Gawande, like Mukherjee, like Paul Kaliniti, and many others, we can draw some important conclusions. One, which I already said, that these writings may be considered as part of the huge and rich South Asian diasporic literature. It is since the 1980s that there has been a tremendous rise in the cultural provenance of Asian American physician narratives. And also, what makes the medical memoir of Asian American physicians is their ability to, their command over language that engages the readers with its ability to turn the complexities of a biomedical case into elegant prose. So by turning their experience of illness into narrative memoirs, I feel that these South Asian American doctors are sort of rehumanizing the coldness of medical discourse. It is through their heartwarming tales and through their elevating use of language that they have turned medical memoirs to be part of literary writing. So I think with these closing comments, I'll wrap up, and thank you so much. If you have any comments or questions, I'd really love to take.
Excuse me, sir. I do have a
Sir,
query.
I would
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, any work which is written on health issues or illness or disease can be called illness narrative?
Any work?
Sir, any work which is written on illness or health issues or disease can be called as a illness narrative?
Provided, like I said, there is an important distinction, and that is that an article published in a medical journal will not qualify as an illness narrative, because primarily for illness to be turned into a narration, it has to have the distinctive features of literary writing, which means it should be imaginative, it should be aesthetic, it should display, it should exhibit the literary tropes by which we identify writing to be fiction, writing to be poetry, and writing to be a biography. So not all writings on illness will be called illness narratives. Narration is, after all, storytelling. So there must be the elements of storytelling to turn a report into a narrative or a report into a story.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
See, a doctor's column, just a minute. You see, a doctor's column in a magazine will not qualify as an illness narrative. Just to, drive home my point.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I understand. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Sir, I want to say something in this regard. I can personally relate to this topic because I am also a doctor, a dentist, and I've done my PhD in literature. So I think I've got a few ideas today on how to pursue this illness narratives, and maybe I'll take up oral cancer or mucormycosis and write something in this this line.
Wonderful.
So thank you very much, sir, for giving me such a beautiful idea. Thank you, sir. And sir, it is always a pleasure to listen to you. And I really thank Kapil Singhel, sir, for this wonderful lecture you have delivered. And I would like many more sessions of yours.
Thank you.
Kapil Singhel, sir, it is a request. Please arrange many more sessions of Prantik, sir.
Yeah. In fact, we could have only 4 sessions for a person and 4 sessions.
Yeah, this is embarrassing, actually. Kapil saying only 4, but thanks for that comment. And it's such a coincidence, therefore, that we have a doctor. Had it been in a physical mode, I would have loved to interact with you. But go ahead and explore this field. A highly exciting,
yes, sir,
and interdisciplinary. And so much of good work can still be done in this area. So please go ahead, and all the best.
Yes.
All the best.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Anyone else? So again, a big thanks, sir. Thanks a lot. Why study illness narratives? And sir has again come out with a unique topic, and whether it is there in the form of book, in the form of essays, And there was a mention of a book, A Million Little Pieces, which has manic depression and a story of a person who is addicted to alcohol. But after a week or so, or after some days, the book lost its popularity when the people learned that it was an imaginative story. Then, how are these how are these narratives? How do they help us? It is cancer, which is not a curse; it's a disease. That is one of the illustration that Sir gave, that we learned from it. Then about AIDS, people were socially outcasted because of, and they were abused. And these narratives, there were certain narratives which were fake, and they made life more horrible for the sufferers. Than that Wuhan diary, where we have what the people of Wuhan underwent during the period of during the pandemic times. Then there was about the first and clinical experience of Rita Sharaf, sir. Rita Sharaf.
Rita Sharon.
Sharon, yeah. Rita and how both there is common between medical ability and narrative ability. How both of them are healers. Then these narratives, they are life-giving. And Sir gave us a list of writers, the Indian, the NRIs or South Asians who have settled in US and have come out with illness narratives. Atul Gawande, Siddharth Mukherjee, Abraham Varghese, and Paul Kalanidhi, and even a touching saga of that person who died perhaps at the age of 36. He was diagnosed with cancer, and along with that, these narratives, they are art of a huge South Asian diaspora, and they are rehumanizing the coldness of medical discourse. So again, on behalf of the participants and the HRD section of Nagpur University, I thank Sir, and we'll see you again in a few days. Yes, sir.
There is a question on the chat box actually.
Okay.
Can I just take this? How can we view the illness literature of India in the light of subaltern and marginal classes and their inclusive disparities? It's actually a very good, thought-provoking question, to which I don't have any ready-made answer, friend. Illness narratives by those who belong to the marginalized sections in Indian society may have been written, especially during these 2 years of pandemic, in the regional languages. As far as I know, I have not come across any narrative from what you say, the subaltern classes in English, right? But I'm sure that with translations, with more and more works from regional languages being translated into English, I think illness narratives from, let's say, from the Dalits or from women or from queer and gay and whatever, from all those sections of society that we consider to be marginalized and minoritized, are going to be visible very soon. However, with one more comment, you see, when we say that are there illness narratives from subaltern classes and minority communities, the whole social media, everything, so much of narration happened on social media, whether it was in the form of blogs, whether it was in the form of Facebook posts. And I think, we need to go beyond the definition of what we think to be a narration or a narrative. A narrative need not always be only a text narrative. And this refers to yesterday's talk when I said that we are moving in a post-print era. So anything that is put out there, even in social media spaces or digital spaces, whether it is textual, visual, all of it will qualify as a narrative. And therefore, I say that if you examine social media, then you will find that there are many examples of illness narratives in regional languages, especially coming from marginalized communities. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
So thank you once again, Professor Kapil. Thanks. And thank you, participants. It's been a long day, and you all deserve a cup of tea now.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so for those wonderful comments on the chat box. Thank you so much. Right? Yeah. So I think I'll take leave and goodbye. And there are, you'll have to suffer me for 2 more sessions, I suppose. Right.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure, sir.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, dear participants, from day after tomorrow, there will be a little change in our schedule for tomorrow, because we have to attend that function, that a session of university from 11 to 12. So our first session, which was supposed to start at 10:30, that will start at 12:15. Will that be convenient to all? Or you would like to take lunch? The session of university is from 11 to 12. You want a long break after that? Or we can start with our session after a short break. Can we make it 1 to 2:30 and 2:30 to 4? Our 2 sessions.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That will be better.
That will be better.
Yes, sir. 1 to 2:30. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Then our session, but you have to attend the session in the morning, the first as well. That's from 11 to 12.
Okay, sir. Yeah.
All of you must have registered by now. Have you registered?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, we are registered.
Yeah. You will be getting certificates for that. Certificate of participation of attending the program, of attending the session. That will be that one thing. And I want 4 names for presentations that we have to start day after tomorrow. 4 participants who would like to make a presentation in the last session day after tomorrow. I had given you choice for schedule, but I have received only 3 responses so far. If that is the case, I'll go by the list and make a schedule and post it in the group. Then you will have to follow that.
It will be better, sir.
Shall I do that?
Yes, sir.
The sequence.
Okay, then fine. It will be in accordance to the sequence in list, the official list which has been circulated by HRD, the HRD section of Nagpur. Will I do that? Shall I do that? And remember,
Yes, sir, of course.
two or three participants at the top. One of them, Sunil Ramteke, is not there. They are not participating.
Sir, I will do the presentation, sir.
Day after tomorrow. Who's that? Who's that? Manoj. Manoj? Yeah. Okay.
So I had a query actually.
Yeah.
So the theme of the refresher course.
Yeah.
Do we need to abide by that exactly?
No, you
when
need
it comes
not.
to a
No, you
presentation?
need not. You need not. No
Can we
need to
work on
abide
our
by
area
that.
of? Can we work on our area of interest?
Yeah, you can. You can.
Okay.
The area of your interest, your choice.
So
It's not
as far
binding
as
at all.
I am concerned, I may put in my topic by today evening.
Okay.
So
Will you present it day after tomorrow?
So on 10th, it's okay for me if it's possible.
Okay.
Yeah, 10th. I'll put in the date. I'll DM you personally.
Who's this, Swami ma'am?
Yeah, sir.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay, then I'll get back with the list, with the schedule of presentation, and tomorrow you have to be there on the WebEx. It will be the link on the WebEx link, which will be posted by Madam Preeti Dharmik, and we will meet at what time? Is it 2 o'clock? At 1 o'clock. Okay. So from 2:30 and 2:30 to 4, we'll carry on with that. Okay. See you then.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I will be posting
Thank you.
feedback, the link for feedback in.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.